Welcome back to the AI Daily Brief. One of the biggest conversations surrounding AI is the threat of potential job displacement. Over the last 12 months, but especially the last 6 months, this has definitely overtaken any sort of robot uprising as the primary consideration and discussion point for people who are concerned about how AI might negatively impact the future. And part of that is, of course, being driven by a certain growing loudness in the way that people are discussing the issue. You might remember that back in April, we got a wave of CEOs from companies like Shopify and Duolingo saying that they were driving towards a more AI native strategy. Shopify's was the first, and the big banner headline of that one was a soft ban on new hiring. Basically, Shopify teams would now need to prove that they couldn't do what they needed to do with AI before they got approval for hiring new people. Duolingo, as I mentioned, followed Shopify, but with an even more direct impact on their business, given that they were explicitly shifting away from contractual content creators for learning modules and instead replacing them with AI-generated content. Now, Duolingo tried to argue that they had always been constrained in their ability to create content by the fact that they had to do it with humans, but there was definitely a bit more backlash around that one. Klarna, meanwhile, has been something of a ground zero, always trying to be first when it comes to AI innovation. And they made a bunch of news recently when they seemingly backtracked on their pure AI approach to customer service, determining after some experimentation that there was always going to be some need or desire for a premium level of human service. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy said in a recent note that he anticipated that because of AI, there likely would be a smaller workforce, although they weren't putting any goals around that now. And of course, the CEO of Fiverr had perhaps the bluntest assessment of the situation, saying that AI is coming for all of our jobs. Still, maybe the thing that got the most headlines was when Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei started putting some numbers around these estimates. In a recent set of interviews, he said that he thought that AI could eliminate up to 50% of entry-level white-collar jobs and lead to 10 to 20% unemployment overall. And indeed, over the last couple of months, this focus on entry-level jobs and the lack of structures that allow people to grow into new positions has definitely been a focus area for people who are looking at the potential impact of this problem. The New York Times encapsulated this in their piece. For some recent graduates, the AI job apocalypse may already be here. The most recent leg of this story comes from comments from Ford CEO Jim Farley at the Aspen Ideas Festival last week. And what it seems to represent is perhaps a shift in the discourse, with Fortune 500 CEOs starting to acknowledge that AI adoption could have a pretty significant impact on the workforce. At the Aspen Ideas Festival last week, Ford CEO Jim Farley said, "Artificial intelligence is going to replace literally half of all white-collar workers in the US. AI will leave a lot of white-collar people behind." With slightly less dramatic but still significant numbers, Marianne Lake, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase's consumer and community business, also told investors recently that she saw its operations headcount falling by 10%, once again thanks to AI. The Wall Street Journal wrote, "The Ford CEO's comments are among the most pointed to date from a large company U.S. executive outside of Silicon Valley. His remarks reflect an emerging shift in how many executives explain the potential human cost from the technology. Until now, few corporate leaders have wanted to publicly acknowledge the extent to which white-collar jobs could vanish." And what's interesting, I think, about Farley's comments specifically is that they are very clearly an attempt to start a conversation from the basis of reality. He said, "We have to acknowledge that these new technologies are great. They'll make a lot of people's lives better. But what are we going to do as a society for people that it leaves behind that are valuable humans? For our society, we have to have a plan for sustainment, and we don't have a plan today." One example of perhaps not the conversation to have were comments from Microsoft's Xbox games executive producer Matt Turnbull. In the wake of the recent round of layoffs at Microsoft, Turnbull wrote on LinkedIn in a now-deleted post, "These are really challenging times, and if you're navigating a layoff or even quietly preparing for one, you're not alone and you don't have to go it alone. I know these types of tools engender strong feelings in people, but I'd be remiss in not trying to offer the best advice I can under the circumstances. I've been experimenting with ways to use LLM AI tools like ChatGPT or Copilot to help reduce the emotional and cognitive load that comes with job loss." Turnbull argued, "At a time when mental energy is scarce, these tools can help you get unstuck faster, calmer, and with more clarity." Brandon Sheffield, the director of Necrosoft Games, called the comments out for being tone-deaf, posting, "After thousands of people getting laid off from your company, maybe don't suggest they turn to the thing you're trying to replace them with for solace." Now, on the one hand, this does bring up a question of what the actual genesis of Microsoft's layoffs are. I think as clean as the narrative would be if it was just AI, there's also a lot of post-COVID realignment and reversion to the mean, as well as just preparing for resilience and macro headwinds. But I think directionally, of course, it is accurate to say that AI is, on a longer time horizon, the big force that is going to shape the nature of the workforce. And honestly, outside of a new headline, there hasn't been some big news story. The reason we're covering it today is that it does feel like there's a shift in the nature of the discussion and a new intentionality that's coming towards it as well. Bloomberg's chief U.S. economist Anna Wong, commenting on the Wall Street Journal story, wrote, "I'm glad this quiet part is being spoken. Let me speak other quiet parts out loud. AI is disproportionately affecting jobs that had benefited from globalization. Manufacturing jobs may be a hedge to loss of white-collar jobs." I think that second part is particularly important because what it represents is that you're starting to see people, as we have this conversation, start to wade in with their thoughts on what might be done. So in Anna's case here, she's talking about a potential return of manufacturing jobs and what that might look like. Then, of course, we've recently covered what Bernie Sanders is arguing for with all this, which is basically that the productivity gains of AI should at least be partially redistributed to workers in the form of a shorter standard work week. What I said when I covered that a couple of weeks ago was that regardless of what you think about that, it's important to be having the conversation and actually advocating for policies that make sense in the context of these changes coming. So from here, what I'm going to be looking for on this show is not only the latest evidence of how job losses are happening, but also how the societal conversation around what we should do about it is changing. As you can probably tell, I think that there are optimistic early signals, if too small to really call a trend, of people acknowledging the reality of the extent of the changes coming and starting to try to think positively about how we can navigate it. This is going to be a conversation for all of us that implicates nothing less than a full revision and reevaluation of the social contract. So, of course, I am glad to be here having that conversation with you. For now, though, that is going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief. Appreciate you listening or watching as always, and until next time, peace.